Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Diverse Governance webcast series. My name is Hannah Wilson, and I am the co-founder of Diverse Educators, and I'm delighted to be working in collaboration with a number of national organisations responsible for school governance. The idea of this webcast series is that we amplify the conversations around diverse representation of school governance for both governing bodies and trust boards. We are delighted to be working with the Association of Governing Bodies of Independent Schools, Governors for Schools, Inspiring Governance, National Governors Association, and the New Schools Network. For this first in 6 webcasts, it is about us starting a series of conversations that will be built on over the coming months. I am very, very grateful to have 4 guests with me this afternoon. And I'm just going to tell you who I have with me. So our first speaker this afternoon is Steve Edmunds. And Steve is a director of the National Governors Association, and he's also a chair of governors. We also have Jeannie Hume, who is a senior recruitment professional, and she is the head of the non-executive directors recruitment for Academy Ambassadors. We also have Dolapo Ongambawo, who is a consultant who works with schools to create school culture where diversity is celebrated, and she's also a governor. And we also have Linda Untanara, who is a senior content editor at The Key to School Governors, and she's a governor at a large 4-form entry primary school in East London. So thank you very much for joining me. Each speaker is going to speak for a few minutes about their position and their experience and understanding about this topic of diversifying governance. And then please do post comments and questions, which we can then ask them when we get to the Q&A. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this event and for NGA to be part of this event and to be involved in such a meaningful conversation. It's something that we're very passionate about as an organisation and as someone who, as you say, has governed for many years and also has been in schools-facing roles. It's as important now as it ever has been. And a nice thing about I very rarely get asked to start a conversation, so it's nice to have the opportunity to start things off, and I'm going to do that by reminding ourselves of something that I think the school system often forgets or at least overlooks, and that is governance is a force for good. It's not just an insurance policy against mishap or disaster or things going wrong, and that's often the lens that it's viewed through in the school system. And if you've had the privilege of governing, whether that's in a school, maintained school, or within a trust environment, whatever type or structure, then you'll know that the real business that governing boards are in isn't navigating that high stakes, punitive, accountability system that sort of dominates the landscape, or the welter of compliance responsibilities that we all have to have regard for as governors and trustees. The real business of governance is providing values-driven leadership and having the opportunity to use our power and influence to do good, to create equity and better outcomes for everyone, regardless of their background. Now, of course, there are legal frameworks and points of reference that we use to achieve that, like the public sector equality duty, which I know we'll be discussing this afternoon. And that, of course, should inform our approach. It should inform the design of our policies and the way they're constructed. But for me, what makes those policies consistent and effective and really creates those conditions for change are the values from which they're derived and the school culture, the way things are done in the school and trust, that ensures that they're implemented. And I'm sure that there are many members of NGA tuning in to this event today, and they'll know that as an organisation, we're devoted to effective governance. And we never miss an opportunity to remind governing boards and those who govern to take a broader view and measure what we truly value, not just what the system pushes us towards measuring. And I guess in this context, and this is so nice that we're doing this by having a professional conversation, it's by taking those opportunities to have those professional conversations with our school leaders and with our stakeholders to understand how diversity, equity, and inclusivity is truly embedded in the life of our school. You know, how does it build knowledge and understanding, you know, throughout the curriculum? You know, what opportunities truly exist to promote equalities and diversity through the life of the school? You know, how do we raise awareness amongst our staff and pupils of concepts like unconscious bias, and what support and training are available for staff to help them embed our ethos and our values? And it is a continuous learning process. And if I may, at this point, you know, demonstrate a little self-awareness, because as a white male, you know, I recognise that the system has always favoured my demographic in all aspects and up all rungs of the professional ladder. So it's really important from my personal perspective as somebody who governs, that I have those learning opportunities. I'm constantly exposed to those learning opportunities, so I get the opportunity to perhaps I'll never gain a level of understanding, the complete level of understanding of others, but it can really help me bridge that knowledge and understanding gap, which then has a real impact in terms of the way I assess the impact of the things that we're doing to make our school or trust a better place, whether that's through data, pupil attainment, the way we view behaviour, and all facets and spectrums of school life. It puts me in a place that I need to be, so that when we come on to discuss the importance of diversity on governing boards and hearing that diverse range of governing views, I think that's absolutely crucial, not just in terms of community confidence, but in terms of our learning and understanding as those of us who govern. So I guess my underlying message to start the conversation for boards is not to view the public sector equality duty as a check and balance to comply with, as a transactional thing, rather as a framework for that values-driven leadership, which creates the conditions for change. And as an organisation, NGA has written sort of extensively about this in publications like Being Strategic, where we talk about the importance of values and culture alongside strategy and how they do drive change. So that's really how I wanted to start the conversation off this afternoon. I'm not sure if I've sort of taken 5 minutes to do that, but brevity is not a bad thing either. So I'll leave it at that point and give someone else the opportunity to build on what I've said.
Thank you, Steve. I'm taking loads of notes of questions I want to ask you in a minute, but a lovely start. And thank you for speaking to the elephant in the room. I mean, we spoke about sort of privilege when we had a chat earlier in the week. And I think there's the privilege of being a governor and being a volunteer as a governor, but you also then spoke about the self-awareness of the privilege we hold depending on our own identity. So thank you so much for really framing the start of our conversation. So Jeannie, can I invite you to now step in and share your thoughts, please?
Hannah. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeannie. I am the head of non-executive director recruitment for the Academy Ambassadors program. So the Academy Ambassadors program is the program that runs within the New Schools Network charity, and we are funded by the Department for Education to source business leaders to join Academy trust boards to bring that commercial acumen to the trust board. So diversity is really important in a trust board, I think fairly obviously, but it's the diversity in thought and skills and experience and lived experience that offers the best range of perspective and support and challenge to the leaders that ultimately the trust board is there to hold to account. So to echo what Steve has said, we are very aware that we don't have all the answers, and this is always going to be a space of learning. But we're committed, basically. We're really committed to improve diversity across Academy trust boards because representation matters. The more diverse a trust board is, the more credibility I think it gains within a community. It's so important for students to see themselves reflected in a trust board, and that's something that we're really passionate about. And so we exist to source candidates on behalf of trust boards because they don't necessarily have the time, the resources to do so. And then we make those introductions, and then the trusts are responsible for that recruitment from that point on. So we act as a support, and particularly within this time at the moment. So providing that support so they, if they have questions around how their recruitment processes can be more inclusive and what things we might be able to do to actually make a difference. Because I think, as we're all aware, diversity doesn't mean much unless there's inclusion or the inclusive behaviours as well. And that's something that we're here to provide that support to. So we, yes, we reach out to our trustees who have that lived experience. We've recently published a series of essays where people have talked about their own experiences. And we're also holding a panel discussion in a couple of weeks. Apologies for the plug, Hannah, hope that's okay. But it's, so people can engage and have that discussion, because the conversation is so important. So yes, ultimately, we're here to, we don't know all the answers. We're committed to learning, and diversity in a trust board is basically, it's so important, and that's what we're here to help achieve. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeannie. Helping us all understand the differences perhaps between NGA and NSNs. We know what these two organisations bring to the system as well. So Dolapo, I'd love to hear from you as a Black female leader in the education system, who works on a lot of the programmes supporting Black leaders to progress, but also as a governor. Can you tell us a bit about your story, please, Dolapo, and your experiences?
Oh, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Hannah, for inviting me. My name is Dolapo Gumbawo, and whenever I'm asked to describe my work, I always say that I'm an advocate for equality and diversity, both in the workplace and within the community. I'm retired from my work at the Institute of Education, University College London, and now I work as an independent consultant with school leaders to create school cultures where equality and diversity are promoted actively, and the educational and business benefits of having a diverse community are recognized and utilized effectively. I'm also a school governor at my local church school in Sunningdale, where I live. I have been a governor since 2011. I mentioned this because that is the reason I was invited to this platform. And I know that Anna will want everyone to know that right from the beginning. But my becoming a governor is a direct outcome of the work I do on diversity. My diversity work started at the London Centre in Leadership in Learning at the Institute of Education, where I led the network of Black educators. In 2008, a unique opportunity came up within the Delivering Positive Action work stream of the now defunct National College for School Leadership. We wanted to increase participants on National College program from minority ethnic background. And so through that, we will be able to raise the number of BMEs that will be in leadership positions in schools. This gave me the opportunity to lead a team of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic background consultants and ed teachers to design a program called Equal Access to Promotion. It's a customized professional development program for BME teachers. To date, Equal Access to Promotion, now under the provision of NEU, National Education Union, remains a significant succession planning strategy helping to diversify school leadership. For the couple of minutes remaining for me, I'd like to take a look at some of the protracted characteristics within the Equality Act 2010 and why I think diversification of good governance is important. First, research has consistently revealed that teachers from minority ethnic background do not consider the teaching profession inclusive enough. And when you look at school workforce data, you see great gaps in BMEs attaining school leadership positions. When you look at gender discrimination, it is clear that headship positions go more often to men than women, because men are often fast-tracked through the system. And on the other hand, when you look at early year provisions, you see very few men there. And we all know that no teacher should face discrimination because of disability in the opportunities available for career progression. But research shows that many teachers will not disclose their disability when applying for jobs because of discrimination. Age is now proving to be an important issue in the development of the next generation of school leaders, as younger teachers are being recruited and fast-tracked through the system. Issues of sexual orientation and identity pose challenges to schools. Why? Because it's difficult for untrained and unsupported school staff to address homophobia and transphobia. These issues constitute significant leadership succession challenges, and I think this is where the diversification of governance in schools will help. On my program, Equal Access to Promotion, school leaders are always encouraged to become school governors. So to lead by example, I became a governor at my local school in 2011, and I've never looked back, because I see the great opportunity that governors are strategically placed to encourage positive action that will address key areas of talent management, recruitment, development for school leaders, as well as retention processes. So I will stop there and let somebody else carry on.
Thank you so much, Dolapo, for bringing some of the data and the research there, and a very compelling sort of like commitment to why this work is so important. So thank you so much. Linda, I'm really glad to be hearing from you. Would you like to now unmute and dive in?
Hi, I have to say it's hard to come last because I feel like I'm just going to be repeating what's already been said. But first of all, my name is Linda and I'm a senior content editor at The Key. And I want to thank you very much for inviting me here to speak today on issues of diversity in the governing board. That's an issue that's very close to my own heart as a diverse governor myself, and also as someone who has recognized throughout my life the way that some barriers can be quite invisible, and that the only way that those barriers can be taken down is if somebody in a leadership position is aware of them. And to me, that's why diversity on a governing board is so important in schools. I mean, there are three reasons to me why diversity really matters when it comes to governance. First of all, you've got legal obligations that require not just diversity on the board, but diversity of thinking. Then you've also got the issue of modeling and representation. And thirdly, you've got this issue of community building. And all of those are centered around this idea of diversifying a governing board. When it comes to legal obligations, every governing board needs to be aware of the Equality Act 2010 and of the public sector equality duty. And I think that when you have a diverse governing board, when you have governors that have had to sort of struggle on the basis of gender or race or ethnicity, religion, what have you, they recognize what those barriers are and they're able to take them down in the school. And then they also recognize that things like the public sector equality duty aren't a tick box exercise. They understand how to tailor those objectives in order to ensure that they're right for the school and that they're right for the pupils. I also think that a diverse board provides the right level of modeling for children. I think that it's tragic that here, even in 2020, it's still very difficult for young Black children and young Asian children and young gay children to find leaders who look like them and sound like them and live like they do. And when we provide that representation for children, we model for them what they can achieve and what they can do. And then finally, when it just comes to building communities, as an American, I have to say that the British school system to me is very unique, because each school is built within its community. There isn't one, one size fits all type of regulations on schools that says you must do everything this way. The system of education here allows for each school to kind of grow organically within its own community. And if the board doesn't reflect what that community is, then you can be pretty sure that that school doesn't reflect that community's needs. And it's important that we recognize that. But I also think that as governors, if we're sitting on a board and if we're looking around and we're thinking, this board doesn't really represent the pupils in this school. This board doesn't really represent the community surrounding this school. I think it's safe to say that whatever it is that's preventing your board from reflecting your community is also preventing your children from growing and from attaining what they need to attain. So I think that it's important for governors as individuals and as boards to really reflect on what it means to be diverse, because it may not, it doesn't have to be diversity based on ethnicity. If you have a school that has a unit specifically for deaf pupils, then you should have deaf governors. You need to ensure that you've got someone on that board that naturally has that filter to look at how the school operates and to look at that school's strategic goals and ensure that they're attainable for everybody in the school, not just a select few, or for those who don't have those same barriers that that other children might have. And so to that end, at the Key, we work really hard on ensuring that we provide not just advice, but also the knowledge to act. Here are the things that you can affirmatively do to encourage better diversity upon your board. These are the steps that you can take to encourage minority ethnic governors and to encourage disabled governors. These are the barriers that might be in place that you can remove in order to ensure that your board is inclusive. Because if you have an inclusive board, then you have an inclusive school. And if you have an inclusive school, then you have children that are going to succeed. Those barriers have been removed for them. So, with that said, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm kind of leading up the rear here, but that's my take on it. So.
Brilliant. Thank you, Linda. So we've got 4 perspectives, 4 different experiences, 4 different organisational sort of like insights, but clearly we've got some golden threads coming through here. We've got some questions coming through from the audience. So if you are listening and you're following us on Twitter and Periscope, please do pop your questions in because I can ask them directly to the panellists. So the first question, and I anticipated this coming up, is how do we proactively try to recruit a more diverse governing body? Because like sometimes one of the barriers is actually people think they are trying to recruit a diversity, but diversity is not coming through. So I'm happy to hear from any of you. Pop your hand up if you want to give an answer about how do the boards go about the proactiveness of that recruitment. Who wants to kick us off? Go on, Steve. Do you want to go first?
Indeed, yes, and I think you're right, Hannah. There will be a lot of agreement and consensus as we go along about what's important and what we all want to achieve. But that's a very good question. Actually, how we do it, how we create the conditions for meaningful change, is slightly more challenging. And I don't think there's one answer to this question. I think it's about an approach and about an awareness. And I was very taken with what Linda said about those invisible barriers. I think a real starting point for boards who are trying to create a more diverse membership and so that there isn't that groupthink is to try and understand what those invisible barriers are. And one of the best ways of doing that is reaching out and speaking to people, finding every opportunity you can to engage with communities, with those communities you're trying to reach, and understand better, and don't be led by sort of underlying assumptions. So I think that's one of the first things that I think continually working to reach out to your community or communities that will help inform and create that better understanding, and then also the support that's there in the system. And it doesn't provide a complete a complete solution. You have to work with it to make it work. But there are support organisations out there that help boards to recruit members and understand that perceived need and the importance of diverse governance. Whether it's governance for schools, whether it's inspiring governance support system and network. I still think not enough boards take advantage of the support that's available in the system. So there are a range of approaches you can take, but of course also creating the conditions as well. So that understanding will help understand perceptions that people perhaps have about governance and barriers to them getting involved, whether it's the time of day that they meet or whether it's the way that business is conducted. I think it's just building that understanding continually is a great start, and I'm sure other colleagues will want to chip in on some of the things I've said there.
Thank you, Steve. Dolapo, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you, Steve, for saying that there's no one way of doing this. But one way I'm going to recommend is advertise that vacancy widely so that it reaches those people you're trying to bring in, because that was the way I came in.
Can you tell us a little bit more, Dolapo? How did you become a governor? Where did you see that advert and how did your process begin?
I saw the advert on the Church of England website, and I made inquiries. Of course, I could have been scared away by seeing that it's an all-white governing board, but because I know, even if they take me on, as people will say, as tokenism, it's if I allow myself to remain a token. And I'm sure since I was with them, they know I'm not a token. So you say, but if it hadn't been somewhere where I can see it, I might not have known there's a vacancy.
That's such a good point, Dolapo. So it's not only the wording of the advert, but it's the placement of the advert and it's the amplification of the advert so that diverse networks are seeing that advert and are seeing it as a possibility for them. So thinking about, like, I'm quite interested in networking. I think quite a lot of people network with people who look like them and sound like them. And actually, how can we intentionally diversify our networks so we're not in a groupthink situation? And I would say LinkedIn, I as a head, I recruited a lot of my governors through LinkedIn. And I was really intentionally networking with people in different sectors across the county. And I was a head of a STEM school and I wanted to have a woman in STEM to be one of our governors. So I basically was befriending any woman in STEM I could find in the county on LinkedIn. And I think it's just that proactiveness, like you say, of showing that it's possible and being in that kind of position. Linda, do you want to come in and add anything else?
Yeah, actually, you hit it on the head. Don't rely just on passive advertising. Actively go out and look for the governors that you want. If you, in fact, if you need, if you're lacking in BAME representation on your board and you need someone who's a financial specialist, then actively go out there and find that person, bring that person in. Don't be afraid of saying, I need diversity on my board. That's not a dirty word. That's an admirable goal, and you are allowed to say that. But don't rely just on advertising. Make sure, because for whatever reason, a lot of people don't understand what governance is. They think it's too much time. They think that they're not qualified in some way. So if you reach out and you grab them, then they're much more likely to join your board.
Thank you. And just to pick up on what Dolapo said about tokenism, because something that I hear quite a lot from my network is that the request is sometimes framed that we need a person of colour to be a governor or a person of colour to be SLT. From the people I listen to, it's the expertise they want to be identified for rather than their skin colour. So actually it's thinking about how can we recruit diverse people who bring skill sets as well? Like, are we looking for someone who's got a HR background or a finance background or someone who has done school improvement? So I think it's the specificity of the search, not only the type of person, but also the background. Like, Jeannie, I wasn't sure if you wanted to mention anything about the kind of the board selection process and perhaps how you broker and how you match some of those people that you place.
Yeah, so we it's not just about skills and experience. That is definitely a key part of it, but we part of our process is really doing that diagnostic call with the trust to actually understand the ethos and the values of the trust, so then it's the right cultural environment for that person to be placed on the board. So skills and experience are absolutely important, and as you said, it's not just around the box ticking exercise, but it's that full holistic approach. And part of that really is that's going to ensure that it's a happy match, but it's really tailored. So we approach every recruitment process as an individual, because we are dealing with individuals. It's not just a blanket approach, as we've said before. Not one. It's not one fits all.
Thank you, Jeannie. We've got a comment. It's not really a question, but I think we can tease it out as a question. A comment about the fact that diverse governance is particularly important for those trusts that are perhaps led by a white male-heavy leadership team. And I see this quite a lot on social media, where it's almost like people are being called out. People have gone to a trust website and they've seen that the directors or the trustees are a particular demographic, a particular gender, and a picture's taken and it gets put out on social media, and it becomes kind of a critical kind of like narrative. I'm just wondering about how, is there an opportunity for us to perhaps invert that? And if there's someone who wants to be a governor or wants to be a trustee and they see a website of a school near them or a trust near them where there's not diversity, could they go about perhaps approaching that organisation and saying, I've noticed that you haven't got any diversity. I feel like I could add some value. I'm just wondering whether it ever works that way as well. And any thoughts on that proactiveness from the other end, Jeannie?
100% support it, definitely. I think that's a really great way to affect some change rather than waiting for the opportunity to arise. It really is seizing the chance. And 100% support it, definitely. Or if they come to our organisation, I'm not trying to plug our wares here, but if somebody's interested in governance and wants to know more, then there are resources to support them. And if whatever conversation that we can have on their behalf or reach out, if it is quite intimidating to see a board full of white, straight, mostly male, of a certain demographic, then that's a conversation that we can have on their behalf. Because the theme coming through the trust that we're speaking with is the appetite for change is there, and it's not always we would like a black female to join the board, and when those conversations are had, we have other conversations to follow that to really address those sort of requests. But it's genuine. It feels really genuine that there's been a shift and there's a bigger movement happening, and people want to see that change. They might just not know how to go about it. So if anybody's interested in joining a trust board and they don't see themselves represented on the board, don't let that stop you. Let's work together. Let's see what we can do to support you.
Brilliant, thank you, Jeannie. And coming back to you, Steve, like one of the things you said was about the kind of the force for good, the values-led leadership of. We have to remember that governors and trustees are volunteering their time and their energy and their expertise, but the kind of the professional conversations that we need to be having about this. I'm just wondering, like, how do you go about perhaps initiating these conversations if you are on a board that's not that diverse or a governing body that's not that diverse? How do you begin to have those courageous conversations perhaps internally?
Well, it's not. Yeah, I take the point. I take the point entirely, but I think that there's some. We do have to get to the heart of the matter, really, and I think it's beholden on all of us to say what we see and ask those questions, those reflective questions, which are so important. So why are so few colleagues from other demographics promoted within our school or trust? Why, for example, are black and minority ethnic pupils excluded in disproportionate numbers? Can you tell us about you know, how our curriculum inspires, you know, whether it's through history, culture, or role models, to you know, to increase that awareness. Now, these are, you know, those are just simple sort of starter questions that anyone can ask. Really, you don't even need a framework for asking them. Really, they kind of, you know, they fit a number of narratives, a number of governance narratives. You know, whatever the conversation may be about, whatever the particular item of business. So really, that one of those key skills of governance, which is inquiry skills, it really comes to the fore here, and you know, I think it's beholden on all of us to challenge ourselves and ask ourselves and our school leaders these questions, and let's start having the conversations really and challenging our assumptions. So yeah, my advice would be, let's just get stuck in and tackle these issues, because you know, we have to.
Thank you, Steve. And Dolapo, if I could come back to you, I loved your phrasing that I might have been a token, but I'm not going to allow myself to be a token, and this board's going to know what I'm going to bring. But how about those diverse governors and board members who perhaps do feel like they've got a seat, but they haven't really got a voice? How can they go about positioning themselves to be perhaps a bit more empowered in these conversations as well?
Oh, thank you very much. And that is where the support that Jeannie mentioned comes in, because we're on this webcast and we're sending out that message now that support is available. How will they be signposted to such support? Because again, when you look at the governing board of a school and you see nobody looks like you will definitely hesitate before you go in. But if you know there's a network of Black governors that you can join, then that may give you the courage to approach an all-white governing board to say, I want a seat. Maybe because I already work on diversity, and all through my life and my work, I know I've had to break down the door to make myself get a seat at the table. So that has become part of me. But not everybody, just like you said, Anna, is like me. They're going to need the support. And Jeannie's organization will do a good job of signposting people to those kind of support.
Thank you, Dolapo. And like you talked about the 9 protected characteristics, because as we know in the Equalities Act, race and ethnicity is one of them. And I think we all know that since May and June, and since the kind of the tragedies have happened and the raised awareness of diversity, equity, inclusion, there's a fear that perhaps there's become a hierarchy of protected characteristics, and perhaps people are leading with race. And there's a question from the feed about how do we make sure that diversity also includes the LGBTQIA voices, the people with disabilities voices? How do we empower those voices? And particularly if we think, like you talked about, Linda, the invisible barriers, we don't always know about everybody's true identity. I think I read a statistic this week that 22% of the country have a disability, but only 4% of teachers declare it. So quite often we don't even know who's got a disability in that space. Any thoughts from any of you about how we can enable and empower the more invisible diversities to also be amplified? Steve, thank you.
I'll come in on this because it's something that I've reflected on in the context of values and strategy. And when we were updating our guidance for governing boards on being strategic, and we were looking at the relationship in that guidance between values and strategy. One of the things we were keen to emphasize is just how important it is for boards to make time in their governing schedule to have conversations with their school leaders, and whether it's through an annual strategy day or strategy focused sessions, where they're actually reflecting on how their values are lived throughout the school. And, if your values embrace diversity and inclusion, that reflected conversation should take into account all aspects, as you've said, Hannah, and it's having the opportunity, the headspace and the time. It's so important for governing boards to do that. And that's why, I acknowledged in my introduction that the system doesn't make it easy for governing boards, because it's, very compliance driven. It's very, much rooted in the accountability system. But actually educational leadership and, that's values driven requires, ongoing and frequent reflection about, whether you actually are living these values truly in the school, and whether they embrace all aspects, all those nine characteristics. And if you feel actually they're not, then how do we redress that balance? Who do we need to reach out to? Is it because we don't have the level of understanding? So what's the response to that? How do we build our own learning, whether that's through CPD for our staff and our boards, or whether that's just through an aspect of the curriculum, or just bringing other people into the conversation. So I do, without sort of being going back constantly to this values driven leadership theme, I just think it's so important that it starts there, and then the strategy for inclusion or inclusivity should emerge from that.
And I'll come to you next, Dalapa, but what I'm also hearing, Stephen, this comes up quite a lot in the whole diversity, equity, inclusion conversation about everyone in the school system, is about carving out that time and that space to have these deeply reflective conversations, because we know that the school system is very busy, very frenetic. We know that some meetings can be sort of like in the evenings, quite a packed kind of agenda. And actually, how do we prioritise these conversations, I guess? How do we build out that space? And how do we make sure we remember that the governors and the trustees actually would really benefit from coming to the CPD or running for your staff as well? Like, is there an open invitation to everyone to come to that training? Dalapa, do you want to add anything to what Steve said?
Yes, I just want to add what I do in my own training program, because often schools will ask me to come and train on race alone. And for me, when you go into a school, let's even say it is 60% diverse, you still have other people. Once you start talking about race, you put their backs up. So I will remind the school that, do you recognize that in the Equality Act 2010, there are 9 protected characteristics? And let's make that our starting point, because I'm sure there are hidden disabilities among your staff you're not aware of. What about gender discrimination? Are you aware it could be going on in your school? So again, it's always moving that conversation beyond race. And I do that because I think it helps the case of race, that you're not the only one in this bracket. And when you look at the vulnerabilities in each of those characteristics, they do sometimes link up. And for me, that is a starting point. Again, in the programs I've led right from the time of the National College, we always make sure when we're putting out those programs, we mention that whatever your group that you fall into, and we list the 9 protected characteristics, provision will be made for you. We've had somebody bring a carer to the training program, and the carer was paid for to come and be with us because that need is there. But how will we know if we don't let them know such provisions are available? So for me, it is speaking, I think Steve mentioned it, speaking clearer, letting people be aware. And that is what would do it for us.
Thank you, Delapis. What I'm hearing loud and clear is about being really explicit and almost quite direct about what we're looking for. And a follow-up question that you've half answered, but I'll see if anyone else wants to add to this. Sandra's asked, are there any specific activities that schools can do to more blatantly advertise board positions as being open to all minority groups, including cultural, but also thinking about socioeconomic diversity as well? Jeannie and then Linda. Jeannie, do you want to come in first?
Sure, thank you. So on a really ground level, it can be as simple as including a sentence in your advertisements to say people from diverse backgrounds are welcome to apply, or something words to that effect. It sounds really simplistic, but it can make a huge difference if someone's reading that and they think, well, actually, there is an opportunity for me here. I would also look at what are your community networks. So if you're looking at cultural or social or economic networks within your broader community and reaching out to those groups. I know we've touched on networking earlier, but it really is, so it's either through LinkedIn or doing your Googles and finding out who's around there and seeing if there's somebody that you can approach and have a conversation with, or to send the opportunity to. So that's just, for me, that's it seems really simple, but it has a huge impact and really works.
And I just as an aside for that, the TES wrote a piece about when you mention flexible working it will be considered. You get lots of people applying for flexible roles, and as a head in every single advert I put, we welcome diverse applications and we are open to flexible working. And I think you do need to be really, really black and white about it. Linda, what would you like to add?
I wanted to add, I guess, a bit of caution, just because I just want to clarify that we're talking about governance recruitment. We're talking about recruiting a governing board, and governors are professionals. And so whenever we are recruiting, let's keep in mind that it's skills first. You know, you've identified what skills you need on your board, and these are the skills that you need. But the idea is to then look at those skills and recognize that it isn't necessarily always going to be straight white men that can fill that role. So identify your skills first, and then seek diversity under that skill. Don't make diversity the aim. Like that can't be your primary focus. Your primary focus has to be the skill that you're looking for, but then recognize that some of your best candidates may not necessarily, show up at the very front. You may have to go and get them, because there are, of all 9 protected characteristics, no matter what skill you need on the board, they exist within those 9 protected characteristics. Go get them, seek them out. But
thank you for emphasising that. And there's a question here from Paul about the role of the local authority when the school's not academised, not part of a trust. What role do they have to play about waking up the local schools who are perhaps not taking part into gender? And who should be doing this? Who should be holding the LEAs to account? Any thoughts on the locality's responsibilities? Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, well, I guess I should declare a bit of an interest here, because for the best part of 20 years, I ran a governor services team in a large, in Europe's largest urban local authority. So I'm acutely aware of these challenges and how the duty we have to provide local leadership of education, and how difficult that is when you're working with what are essentially autonomous, freestanding, locally led institutions that the law and that gives the power to effectively run their, even if they are local authority maintained. The governing board largely recruits their own members and decides on the skills and knowledge and profile that they need to do that, and it should be that way. So we have to be honest and realistic about the local authority's role here, which is to influence, through culture, through expectation, and through support. And what we tried to do was to work with groups, work with communities and organisations to try and create that expert facilitation that schools would benefit from, to have more diverse governing boards. And it worked sometimes. Other times it was less successful, as you could expect. And perhaps just before I forget, I'd just like to come in on the skills point as well, because I absolutely agree with what Linda said about skills first. But I think sometimes, and governor recruitment, local authority governor recruitment was my life for a long time. So I'm particularly sort of tuned into the fact that actually sometimes we take too narrow a view on the skills aspect, where we expect people to arrive ready-made, ready-skilled to deliver in the way that we need them to. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm still learning at my stage of life. I'm not ready-made. I'm ready, ready to deliver. There's always something I can improve at. So I think when you're recruiting, it's worth taking that wide of you and actually remembering that skills can be acquired and built. So if you see somebody with the commitment and the capacity and the willingness to engage, whether that's through training, experience, mentoring, then it's worth taking that into consideration as well. It's not as simple as saying, well, we need an accountant to do finance, we need a lawyer to interpret the regs, but a lot of governing board recruitment still is seen through that lens, and it feels a bit 1990s to me. I don't know about you guys.
I love the professional challenge. You're modelling beautifully the fact that we don't always agree and we haven't all got the same perspectives. So the diversity of your own perspectives, I think, is really, really powerful. So Lapo seems to have left us for a few minutes, but hopefully she'll come back. A question from Adelaide is about how do we make sure that boards commit to this diversity, equity, and inclusion work over time, and that this is a long-term commitment and not perhaps a fad. Any thoughts on the kind of longevity? And Dolapo talked about succession planning earlier on, but how do we get that real commitment that this is going to be a long-term commitment? Jeannie, thank you.
I would say, so the discussions that I've had with Trust is making it part of the wider strategy. So the Trust strategy, not just a talking piece for now because it's really topical, but yeah, absolutely looking at the succession planning for trust boards and how they can develop talent to take over those positions when people come to the end of the term, but making sure that it's an item on the board meetings, that it's discussed or it's reviewed regularly, that they set themselves some targets, and not that it's just about hitting targets, but it's a topic of conversation that's always going to be had, because it will always evolve and we will always be learning. So yeah, weave it into the strategic direction of the trust.
Brilliant, thank you. And a question here, I'm glad you came back to Lapo because this question's got your name on it. Somebody's asking about how you diversify a governing body when you live in a rural area. And I'm reading in brackets there, perhaps a whiter part of the country. And I know we talked about how you got onto that governing body. Can you speak about some ideas there about the rural reach?
Yes, and it doesn't come more rural than Sunninghill or Sunningdale. So again, it is how do these schools get out the message that there's a vacancy? And just like Linda said, it mustn't be about tokenism, because when you focus on just diversifying for the sake of diversifying, that's when it is tokenism. But when you recognize the skill, you go out, you recognize that this person has the skill, and you invite the person to come on board, then you're not doing tokenism. Again, I think it has to be an ongoing conversation. Diversity will never be a done deed. No. Let's take that off the table, because it is constantly examining ourselves, doing reflective thinking. Are we doing enough? Is there more we can do? And it goes for both ways. When I train, I always, especially when it is an all BME group, I always ask them first, let's check the monkeys on our shoulders, because we all come with those prejudgments of what is going on in other people's heads. So shake off that monkey first. So you are open. You know that, yes, you go in there because you qualify to be there. And when you take that seat, you leave your mark. That's what I will contribute.
Thank you, Dolapo. And you've mentioned seats a few times, and I know we love the quote about if there's not a seat, then you take your folding chair with you. And there's a similar metaphor about you extend the table. Like, that's something that comes up quite a lot in the narratives I see about the fact that, well, the board's full and the governing body's full, and we know we need to diversify, but there aren't any spaces at the moment. Are there any tips from any of you about how we tackle that as one of the barriers, that actually we've got all the governors that we need, or all the directors we need?
I've known boards that will invite spectators. You want to come and see how they do it, and they will invite you to come in. So again, that could be a way of widening, stretching the table a little bit to accommodate more. So you are not a full governing board member, but you are allowed to attend meetings and be an observer.
I love that, Dolapo, like a shadow senior leader or a shadow governor.
That is it, yeah.
And that's so a comment from Alan about the fact that quite often the parents' voices we most need to hear are the voices we don't hear, because they perhaps had a poor experience of schooling themselves, and how can we create those conditions to invite them in and make sure their voices are being represented. So I think there's something there about creating that succession plan for governors and for trustees. Brilliant comments from all of you. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you all just to summarise, like, what's your one key message? What's your one key takeaway that you'd like the audience today to think about? So can I ask you, Steve, first, please?
Yeah, well, I just like to echo really what's been said, and about making inclusion and equity fundamental part of your values-driven leadership. Your have clear strategic goals linked to those values, and make the time and the space in your governing calendar to measure those things that you value, and how your school and trust is creating the conditions for change. That's why we govern. We govern for children and for better outcomes, and we should remember that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Jeannie, how about you? What's your takeaway?
My takeaway is probably, I mentioned before, that diversity doesn't mean much unless there's the inclusive behaviours to go with it. So to look at not just how we recruit people to join trust boards, but how we onboard and then how we retain those great people. So be open to changing the way that we do things, and put everything that we do under the microscope, because we said it before, we're always learning. So that would be my little gift.
Thank you, Jeannie. And I know one of our future foci for one of the other webcasts is about the inclusive behaviours. And I've been reading quite a lot about CQ recently, cultural quotient, and how we can make sure that when we are diversifying our spaces, that actually the inclusive behaviours are there to enable diverse people to actually flourish. Dolapo, how about you? What's your main takeaway?
Oh, my main takeaway will be our conversation on diversity must continue, must be ongoing. It is only when we do reflective thinking constantly, regularly, that we will achieve the ideal we're striving for.
Thank you, Dolapo. And when we planned this series, that was entirely the reason why. It's not a one-off event, it's not a bolt-on, it's not standalone. It's an ongoing conversation that we can build on and people can hopefully sort of like loop in and out of. And how about you, Linda? What's your key takeaway?
My key takeaway is that if you're looking around at your board and you're thinking, all right, well, this isn't diverse enough, but we've done everything that we can and it's just not working. That's not the time for navel gazing. That's the time when you actually need to work even harder, because if you're having barriers to diversity on your board, that means you're having barriers to diversity in your school, and that you need to do better for your children. And I'd also just like to point out what an amazing time we live in right now, because, you know, as a result of this pandemic, governing boards across the country are learning how to work remotely. And this is actually a fantastic opportunity for diversity in and of itself, because maybe now we can break down some of those geographic barriers that were preventing diversity and ensuring that we're able to get the right people onto the right boards across the country.
Can I just say again, thank you for your time this afternoon. I appreciate how busy everyone is, and I appreciate you gifting another hour of your time to this conversation. And I also want to emphasise to the listeners that this is the first in 6. Our next webcast is on the 3rd of December, and I'm always open for people putting themselves forward. If you don't feel like you have been represented in this conversation, or you see a gap or a topic you'd really like to come and talk about, please do contact me via the Diverse Educators website, because if you can't get involved in this series, there'll be future opportunities to have your voice heard as well. We do want to make sure we're amplifying the diverse voices from the system. So thank you very much. Enjoy your Thursday night, and we look forward to seeing you at the second webcast very soon.